A new independent study commissioned by the Environmental Working Group has been released. Scientists tested popular oat cereals, oatmeal, granola, and snack bars for glyphosate, the key ingredient in the chemical cocktail known as Roundup. And they found that roughly 3/4 of conventionally grown samples had unsafe levels of glyphosate in them. That means that nearly 75% of these products had more than 160 parts per billion of this single chemical in them. Cheerios was tested and it came back with 3 times that amount. Quaker Oats, old fashioned oats, had 9 times that amount, coming in at 1,300 parts per billion. Organic brands had much better results, so only 1/3 of those samples tested positive. However, it's safe to assume that anybody who's buying organic expects there to be 0 parts per billion of glyphosate or any other pesticide or herbicide that's synthetic in their food. So here's something I found interesting on the EWG website. They posted here, they say, each year more than 250 million pounds of glyphosate are sprayed on American crops, primarily on Roundup Ready corn and soybeans, genetically engineered to withstand the herbicide. That number is verified by the U.S. Geological Survey, by the way. But when it comes to the food we eat, the highest glyphosate levels are not found in products made with GMO corn. Increasingly, glyphosate is also sprayed just before harvest on wheat, barley, oats, and beans that are not genetically engineered. Glyphosate kills the crop, drying it out so that it can be harvested sooner than if the plant were allowed to die naturally. This is unbelievable. I mean, the extent to which they're using these chemicals, we don't even know about. In this case, they're not using them for the life cycle of the plant. They're using them once the crop has already grown, just to expedite the process of drying it out and harvesting the wheat or grain or whatever they're trying to get out of it. So this is kind of like a new use that I don't think many people are familiar with. So anyway, here's another couple things I want to note. First, like we already said, glyphosate is the key ingredient to Roundup, and the International Agency for Research on Cancer says this chemical is a probable carcinogen and has been linked to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. To be fair, this is from its application and not necessarily to the foods we eat. To also be fair, because it's due to the application, you have farm workers here who are taking a huge risk when spraying this stuff. And I looked into it. 46% of farm workers in this country are illegal immigrants, or however you want to label that. But you're talking about people who come to this country taking whatever job they can, and they have no representation in our government. And we actually have very little idea the health consequences that these people carry with them because they're not in our system. We're not really keeping track of them. So I think that's important to note. This is an occupational risk, and the most, maybe not the most, but 46% of the people who have this occupational risk aren't represented by our government. I do think it's logical to assume that also eating a known cancer-causing chemical or substance can also be dangerous to your health. So even though this is occupational, is an occupational hazard, like, you got to be kidding me if you think, like, oh yeah, if you spray it, it'll get you sick. But go ahead and eat tons of fruit and vegetables, whatever you want. Yeah, eat 6 servings of vegetables a day, whatever it is that they say to be healthy. Meanwhile, all this stuff is coated in chemical waste, basically. And also the farming techniques that are used, they're just spraying coats and coats of this stuff on plants. It stays on the top layer of soil. And when it rains, this top layer of chemical soil, or top layer of chemicals on the soil, basically gets washed down to our rivers, streams, oceans, sometimes to other crops, sometimes even, I'm sure, to organic fields if it's downfield from where these Roundup Ready crops are grown. So anyway, I think that's it's important to note that this is an occupational hazard, but yeah, eat at your own risk. You'd have to be crazy to tell me that this does nothing for you. Another thing that's I think worth noting is that Roundup Ready has or Roundup has plenty of other chemicals in it. glyphosate is just one chemical that we know about and that has been tested. Monsanto Bayer, now due to the merger, they hold proprietary ownership of the information of what's actually included in Roundup. And how does glyphosate interact with these other chemicals? I mean, this is why we call it a chemical cocktail, because once you introduce multiple chemicals to each other, it's really hard to tell what they transform into and what effect this chemical cocktail really has. So it's dangerous stuff. Independent research has frankly not been allowed or has been discredited because Monsanto is a giant influential company that has their tentacles in our government. And so yeah, that's one other point. And then the other one I want to say is that glyphosate bioaccumulates in our bodies. So we know that it bioaccumulates in the soil for up to 6 months. And we also know that humans store glyphosate in their bones and organs, but we don't really know for how long this lasts. This isn't something that gets immediately 100% flushed out, and increased exposure basically means that your body stores more and more of it every time you take it in. So your body's not able to process this stuff out, and it's just stacking inside of you. So again, the known effects of this, the research really hasn't been done. And this is a product that's been on the market now for I think 3 decades. So one other thing worth mentioning is how much the application of this known carcinogen has increased over the years. In 1992, the USGS estimated that 10 million pounds of glyphosate were sprayed on crops a year. 10 million in 1992. Let's skip forward to 2015, and that number has jumped to roughly 290 million pounds a year. And this is one reason that we need to keep spraying more, is because the plants are adapting. They're getting used to this chemical, and they're able to thrive even with its application. And same goes for some bugs, although we've lost like 70% of our biodiversity on this planet in the last 30 years. And of course, anybody with a brain thinks there's a connection to this so-called green revolution and the loss of biodiversity, loss of insect life, loss of bees. So I think this proves that chemical warfare on weeds is entirely unsustainable and a really, really dumb idea. It's very short-sighted. I can go on for days about this, but I'll leave you with this. The widespread use of Roundup is so great that glyphosate is being used on non-GMO crops, as the study pointed out. And more alarmingly, it has been found in 70% of U.S. rainfall samples. That's the majority of rivers, streams, ditches, and wastewater treatment plants. And in over 90% of pregnant women who are tested, glyphosate has been found. If you do not consent to being exposed to this chemical, good luck, because you really have no say in it. It's coming for you, and there's very little you can do. Even if you're eating organic and trying to live a healthy lifestyle, it's almost impossible to cut glyphosate and other toxic pesticides and herbicides out of your life.